Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. And Senator Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Murphy, I wanted to pick up on some of the questions I had in the May estimates about platypus going to San Diego Zoo. At the time, in response to some of my questions, you spoke about conditions that I understood was Taronga Zoo was preparing a draft of those conditions, and you said they are doing research and they will submit those conditions to us as a draft. Has that happened?
Paul Murphy, Assistant Secretary, Wildlife Trade and Biosecurity. Senator, we are still waiting for the Taronga Zoo to provide us a draft of those conditions.
And so the platypus haven't been sent yet to San Diego Zoo, is that the case?
That's right, Senator. So we've received an application from Taronga. There are a number of things that have to take place. One of those is the preparation of the conditions, and we're still waiting for Taronga to do that. So no platypus have been sent.
So have you had any more discussions with Taronga since May?
I believe officers from my area have had discussions, but generally with the zoo, but I don't think there's been, my impression is there's not much progress has been made yet on those conditions.
So when you say generally with the zoo, do you mean that it's just generally about exports, or was it specifically about platypus being exported?
Generally about wildlife trade that the zoo's involved in, and the officers would have confirmed that the status of this application, but there's no news, if you like, on the development of those draft conditions.
It sounds a bit vague, so I'm just trying to understand it. Do you mean that it's now in the, it's up to Taronga Zoo to advance this, and you're not the driver here?
That's right, Senator, and that's always been the case. Taronga are committed to doing the research and preparing those conditions. They're required for safe transport and for the platypus to be able to be held overseas, and that's really what we're waiting for, so we can progress the application for the export permit.
And is there anything formally set down, or in the discussions that your officers had with the zoo, do they set out the conditions, aspects or categories that need to be addressed when these conditions are set out in detail by the zoo? Like, is there some template? Like, how does it work?
There are broad requirements set out in the EPBC Act and also in the accompanying regulations. As well as that, there are conditions that are similar for some animals like koalas. So the zoo is well across how those conditions are set out.
So just finally on the conditions, are you saying that, like, if you rely on the EPBC Act and the regulations, they don't get into specifics about platypus, do they?
No, they set the standards for animal welfare in this regard in terms of transport and then the care of the animals once they go to the overseas facility.
So would that cover exposure to crowds and noise, considering there has been now a lot of research about the abnormal behaviour it can create in animals, and there's often an increase in certain hormone levels because of the stress the animals go under. So considering that work has been done now, is that something that you ask the Taronga Zoo in this case to address, how they would manage the suffering that the animals would experience?
So our expectation is that the conditions developed would take into account all the best practice science that's available. And until we see a draft of those conditions, it's very hard to comment on what they will have in them.
So I gather you're aware of this, the research about the high cortisol levels that's found in native animals when they are under stress because of, sort of human activity. So that's what I'm just trying to understand. If you're getting down to that level of detail in terms of working with Taronga Zoo with regard to the welfare of these animals.
I'm not a platypus expert, Senator. The zoo is working with researchers. They'll take into account all the latest science. When we receive those draft conditions, we'll look, officers that know a lot more about care of animals than I do will take into account that science. They will look at the conditions and work with the zoo to make sure that they're best practice.
So will the public know when we get to the point of Taronga Zoo handing over the draft conditions to you? And partly why I'm asking is that there is public concern because although it hasn't happened for a while, platypus have died when they've been sent to zoos and overseas previously. There's zoologists in Australia very concerned about this. So I'm trying to understand, is there a point where the public will know? Do you release these set of conditions that Taronga Zoo comes up with for public comment?
I think that's something we would discuss with the zoo at the time. There isn't a statutory requirement for consultation on permit conditions. But as you say, Senator, we're very much aware of the public interest and concern about the proposal.
But you're not required, it's not required to go public?
Not for that specific step, no, Senator.
Okay, well, the other one that I wanted to ask you, just staying with the platypus, is these comments from the Threatened Species Commissioner, and it was in your answers, and maybe that's when it came up last May, of San Diego Zoo putting in about $500,000 to a platypus conservation project. So has there been any more? Are you directly managing that, or does that come through Taronga Zoo? So can you just give us a bit more information how this project is being carried forward?
I'm probably not the right person to answer that aspect.
Down here. Mr. Lang? Mr. Lang?
Senator Sebastian Lang, Acting Assistant Threatened Species Commissioner. Senator, the project you're referring to is a project captured in the Threatened Species Prospectus, and it essentially involves San Diego Zoo providing money directly to Taronga Zoo as a project. I can't advise whether or not that project has been initiated at this point, though. I can take it on notice.
So do you have responsibility? Like, is this just a relationship between San Diego Zoo and Taronga Zoo, and then you're informed about it, or do you have to tick it off?
Senator, it's a direct relationship between San Diego Zoo and Taronga Zoo, subject to obviously the regulatory arrangements that Mr. Murphy oversees.
So do you mean by that for San Diego Zoo to hand over the $500,000 for this conservation project, that would only happen after
Senator,
platypus have gone to San Diego?
No. In fact, it's independent of the platypus arrangement. Yeah.
Okay, so it's independent. So San Diego Zoo is talking about $500,000 for platypus conservation. How do you intersect with this project? Like, is it again just up to Taronga Park Zoo, or do they engage with the experts in Australia on platypus, the platypus experts in Australia, zoologists who have worked on this for many years?
That's correct, Senator. So the project was a project in the Threatened Species Prospectus. We looked at all the projects considered for the prospectus and established this one had a lot of merit for its conservation value, but beyond that, it's a project that San Diego Zoo is investing in with Taronga Zoo.
But just the way you answered the question, then you judged it for its conservation value. I wasn't hearing that there was, and you're intersecting with the zoologists who work in this field outside Taronga Zoo. Is that the case?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice to be sure, but my understanding was that it was a project involving a range of conservation scientists working on platypus.
Okay, so if you can provide details how it's working in Australia and where it's up to, like, has the $500,000 been handed over to Taronga Zoo?
Senator, if I could take that on notice too, please.